Hello and welcome to the first ever Climate Recon 2050 online discussion event. Today on the EU's climate neutrality objective and its impact on EU and national climate policy. Whether you're joining live or watching the video afterwards, we much appreciate your interest. My name is Matthias Duwe. I'm head of the climate team at Ecologic Institute, and I have the pleasure of coordinating the Climate Recon 2050 project. Before we get to our moderator and our excellent speakers, let me briefly introduce the project and the topic of our discussion today. Climate Recon 2050 is a platform for exchange of experience and dialogue among national policymakers and other technical experts from around the EU. Our topic are the development and implementation of national long-term climate strategies. The project's already been running for 3 years, and with this event we are marking the start of a new iteration, which of course has to take place in the virtual world, because as you can tell from the pictures I'm showing of past activities, the project is usually centered around bringing together smaller groups of people for a focused conversation. But we of course also want to engage with the broader community, such as all of yourselves currently listening and watching. We are honored to be working with an excellent set of partners from around the EU. And for this iteration, those are presently WISE Europa from Poland, the Energy Policy Group from Romania, the Joseph Stefan Institute from Slovenia, and the Tallinn office of the Stockholm Environment Institute in Estonia. We are indebted in terms of both financing and encouragement to our funders, of course. First off, there's the European Climate Initiative, or EUCI, which is a financing instrument established by the Environment Ministry in Germany. And we are also glad to have as a co-sponsor and intellectual partner the European Climate Foundation that we've also been able to bring on board for today's event. So, where in a snapshot do we stand with regards to the EU target of achieving climate neutrality by 2050? Needless to say that we are in the midst of a global pandemic which hit just months after this goal was formally adopted. In this context, I think it's important to highlight that the climate neutrality objective is centrally mentioned in the legislation that's been agreed for the implementation of the recovery plan funding that's currently in motion, and a dedicated share of which needs to go into climate-related investments. Moreover, there's been political agreement on raising the EU 2030 target from at least 40% to at least 55%, based off of a proposal that the Commission brought forward in September of 2020. The specific formulation for the target is still part of the negotiations on the EU climate law. These have also been going on since the presentation of the proposal just over a year ago. This law will make climate neutrality by 2050 a binding target in law for the European Union. Few observers, including myself, would have predicted these developments when the European Commission published its draft EU long-term strategy in November of 2018. The document that put forward a climate-neutral Europe as strategic orientation for the future. In the meantime, of course, while all of this has been happening at the EU level, national policymakers and ministry experts have been working on the implementation side. And they've been drawing up short-term and longer-term planning documents to achieve the 2030 targets and to define long-term objectives and figure out how to get there. Priority has clearly gone to the national energy and climate plans, which are meant to contain specifics on policies for the period towards 2030. You see these in the two tables that are up on the screen, complete set of NECPs, but not so much on the long-term climate strategies. Our work as Climate Recon 2050 has shown us how many dedicated and smart people are working on these national long-term strategies in member states. And several of the EU member states have in fact revised their long-term ambition upwards, all going to various forms of setting climate neutrality goals. But notwithstanding, we still have a third of all of them that have actually not submitted yet their long-term climate strategy, although the deadline for this was the 1st of January 2020. And so we also don't know yet how good they are, how detailed, how they compare. And in fact, there isn't a clear process for their assessment that is anywhere envisaged and written up as an obligation in EU law. So to conclude, despite the attention that's gone to climate neutrality as an EU long-term goal, these national strategies have clearly not received the same level of attention. This is all meant to be backdrop for the central themes that we want to pursue in the conversation today, which are what's been the impact, or what is it now, of the climate neutrality goal on EU and national climate policy? What effect, if any, has it had on national long-term strategy development? And is there a need for more EU support to member states? And with this introduction, I'm now handing over the microphone to our esteemed moderator for the discussion, our dear colleague, Erica Hope, who is Director for Climate Planning and Laws at the European Climate Foundation. Erica, we really appreciate you taking on this role. Take it away.
Thank you, Matthias, very much indeed. I'm really delighted to be a part of this event, which is addressing a topic very close to our hearts at the European Climate Foundation, namely how can we put our economies on a mission to achieve climate neutrality, and delighted to see just shy of 100 participants here today, so that's showing the interest in this important topic. Before I begin, let me just quickly apologise for my appearance. I'm afraid this is not some weird Zoom filter. It's my actual face after a nose surgery a couple of weeks ago. I can already breathe better thanks to the surgery, but it's a little bit embarrassing for Zoom calls. But I feel like we're among the governance family anyway, so hopefully that's okay. So just to quickly talk through how the session is going to work, we will start off in a moment with actually a couple of Mentimeter questions just to get everybody in the mood after Matthias's excellent setting of the scene. And then we'll move to the main business of the day, which is a discussion with a very prestigious panel whose names you can see here, and I will briefly introduce them as we go. That will be for about 45 minutes, and it'll take the form of me sort of interviewing the panelists about their experiences with long-term strategies and the implications of the EU's climate neutrality target. Then for the last half hour, we will have a discussion with your esteemed selves, the audience, and that will, if we can just go to the next slide, that will work via the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of your screens. As per the instructions here, we'd ask that you just type in your questions, making clear who you would like to address the question to. And you can also vote for questions that other people have put. So if you think that they're interesting, which will kind of push them further up the list and increase the chances that we get to them. Please also use the chat if you have any other comments, and we hope it's okay with everybody that the session is being recorded for upload later. I think you've all had to click anyway to say that that's okay. Oh, we're at 100 now. That's a nice round number. So now the last thing before we really kick off properly, we'd like to get to know you. I mean, a year into online life, you probably have all used this by now several times, but just in case not, you see the instructions before you. Please just type in menti.com and then put in the code, and then answer the questions that you will see appear before you. And then we'll be able to see in real time, well, where our audience is and what you think on a couple of key issues. So if we could just do that now, phones at the ready. So this is just really to know where we're all from. Surprise, surprise, Brussels is coming up quite big. Vigo, excellent. I find this very cool how it works. Perpignan. I wonder whether this is people working from home, other homes than their initial working cities, or whether there's some new offices and representations opening up in Graz as well. So Berlin actually coming out as at the lead there, just ahead of Brussels. But really, as you can see, we have a really good spread there, and that's from the south to the north, with Vigo and Tallinn, and then we've got Salzburg and Bucharest and Ghent. Excellent. Still going up. Okay, I think, should we go to the next one, Matthias?
Sure.
Home Office, I see Guido in the chat. So yeah, and the questions get a little bit more difficult as we go along, but kind of interesting as well. So this is just to get a flavour of what are the interest profiles of people who are joining the call today. EU climate law probably on everybody's minds today with the trilogue later. I mean, it's a funny question. I'm sure everybody's kind of interested in all of it, really, but it's good to see what attracts your finger first. Okay, so I think EU climate law and long-term, oh no, quite even running there. Oh. All the big issues of the day. Spectrum. Yeah. Great. Well, hopefully we'll manage to touch on all of those in various ways, in some form or another today. And the last question, I think, is the most complex. So you're going to have to sort of indicate whether you strongly agree or somewhat agree or disagree with the following statements. So lots of
this one will take a while for people to respond to, for sure.
Yeah. But probably appropriate for the nature of the forum that there's a quite strong interest or agreement that long-term strategy should inform today's climate policy. Going slightly down as we continue, I notice. Interesting that there's I think more agreement on what should happen than about what should happen than that these things are already happening. But I guess that's why we need to discuss and continue improving. And this last one about member states achieving net zero on their own, I think will be an interesting point of the discussion to see to what extent additional EU intervention or support is needed. Nice. Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thanks everybody for taking part in that. It's always nice just to kind of wake everybody up and have a little bit of a snapshot of where people stand. So now it's really high time that we turn to our panel. And just to recap what we're trying to explore today, really the question is, how can long-term strategies help countries to gear all their decisions around the goal of climate neutrality by helping to give an understanding of the pathways and the steps needed to get there? In other words, how can we make backcasting live? And also, if it's not happening sufficiently, then why is that? And what can we do to increase the chances of it? So to explore this, I'd like to first turn to Stefanie Hiesinger, who is a member of cabinet of the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans. And I'm sure most of us on this call have interacted with Stefanie in one form or another at different moments. Stefanie is a lawyer and a long-standing Commission expert on many aspects of climate policy, and she unfortunately has a slight problem with her voice today, but she's very kindly and valiantly agreed to continue with the session anyway. Although we do have to make sure we don't completely destroy her voice because she will need it for the trilogue later. So Stefanie, we are now just over a year on from member states accepting the target that the Commission proposed in its Clean Planet for All communication in November 2018, that goal of climate neutrality. And of course, that goal is soon to be put into law, maybe very soon, we'll see. But I'd like to ask you, how do you feel about this decision now? Would you find that this goal and its legal adoption is a game changer for the EU and the member states?
Thank you, Erica, and thanks also to Matthias and colleagues for having invited me to that interesting discussion, and I hope we will have a good exchange now. Well, I mean, I guess everybody knows that we think it is, and it's not only about thinking, it is really a landmark to have decided that the EU will be the first climate neutral continent by 2050 is, well, call it a game changer. It's a landmark. It is really important. You know that the political guidelines of Ms. von der Leyen, when she took over this commission as president, already stated that she has the ambition to do that. And then in December 2019, just shortly after also the Commission presented the European Green Deal, the heads of state and government have then signed up to that goal. So there is this clear political commitment. And again, I cannot stress enough that this is really not minor. It sets us on an irreversible path towards our more sustainable future. Of course, climate neutrality alone is not sufficient. That's why the European Green Deal is much more holistic. But it is at the heart of the Green Deal, and it is a very strong message to our citizens, to our businesses. It offers the predictability and transparency that is needed for everybody to adjust not only investments, but also actions. It is a very strong message to our international partners that we are ambitious and that we will continue to pursue the goals that we agreed under the Paris Agreement. And well, as I said, it is also at the heart of our European Green Deal, our growth strategy. And Matthias very well said it, the European Green Deal is also now at the heart of Europe's recovery strategy. So it is a commitment that actually impacts EU policy as a whole in the broadest way. And yeah, that I think is a game changer, or yeah, really very, very fundamental. Of course, the political commitment is not enough. But we are also not stopping at the stage of the political commitment. In the past year, a lot has already happened. You referred in particular to the European climate law, which is still in interinstitutional negotiations. We will have indeed another trilogue this afternoon. And yeah, we will then, yeah, the climate law sets this target into legislation. So it will go a step further, not only be a political commitment, but become legally binding on the union as a whole. So that is really another dimension, I would say. Of course, even then, we are not yet there. A lot still needs to be done. The EU to become or to set ourselves on the path towards that climate neutrality, the Commission has proposed to step up the 2030 climate target. You know, we propose a target of at least minus 55% by 2030, and we are now working hard preparing the implementation of that target with a number of legislative proposals that will come on the table in June 2021, so in June this year. That is called the Fit for 55 package. We are quite well on time, but a lot of work is being done, many impact assessments being prepared. So that is also a huge strand of work on our side. Yeah, and then until 2030, we will have to ensure that we stay focused and disciplined, and not only, you know, at the European level, but also at the level of the member states, that we remain on track. I think we will speak about the national energy and climate plans, which is the vehicle also to ensure that member states' actions move into the same direction. And then, yeah, let's see, we should get there, and that is really a good message if we then manage to really put this political commitment into reality.
Thanks, Stefanie. Yeah, well, I think there are, we certainly witness in many ways the changes that the climate neutrality goal is sort of precipitating. One of the things that I think arguably helped to make sure that that target was adopted was the fact that the Commission did that very thorough analysis of the Clean Planet for All, where there was really an extremely comprehensive economy-wide assessment of how that goal could be achieved. And so it was adopted with kind of confidence that there was a way that that could happen. And I think I have heard other people from the Commission comment that effectively the Green Deal is the sort of outplaying of that analysis in terms of the policies and so on that are put forward. That said, and I think, here we are all in this forum, people who are aware of the value of that sort of analysis to help guide the policies and the steps and so on. And as you mentioned, the 2030 target has been increased in ambition, which is a very welcome step. I think obviously some people would wish it would go further, but in any case, we're certainly looking forward to the legislation that will help to deliver that. But actually, just going back to the long-term strategy itself, the 2018 analysis was done with a lower figure for 2030, and actually was a set of different scenarios that some of which might achieve climate neutrality. Do you think that there's a need for, or is there any intention to potentially update that analysis from the EU level to make sure that it stays kind of up to date with these developments?
Well, first of all, maybe to say that indeed that the long-term strategy was a very fundamental piece of work to make this all happen. Because if you're not able to show that that your political commitment or your political target can actually be put into reality, then you cannot convincingly, get people on board to sign up for it. So indeed, that is a very fundamental work. That's the way the Commission always works. That's also what we did now in September with the 2030 climate target plan that underpins this increased target for 2030 to show that this is, not only feasible, but that this has certain benefits, and that we actually need to do this if we want to reach climate neutrality. On the updating, I think, well, right now we are really busy, working on the 2030 climate target. So I think this updating will happen as we go along. It's a process. We, even in the climate law proposal, we say that we will, always have to see and to verify whether we are still on track, whether more is needed, at which level more would be needed. So I think that is from now on a constant task to ensure that we remain on the path towards climate neutrality. But all our decisions will continue to be underpinned, and I mean the circumstances also change. For example, you know that we set in 2013-14 we set the target of minus 40% for 2030, and then a few years later the Commission very clearly said, well, with the policies that we put in place we would actually be beyond that target. So that is never excluded, and also, in general, much welcome, because if you get there quicker, I don't think anybody would be against, but at the same time you need to ensure that these policies are put in place in a way that they offer a predictable frame, and that you carry along the people, that you incentivize the necessary investment, and that this transition, which is, again, it's not minor, it's really major, and we need to make sure that everybody, comes with us on this path, and that is a big task.
Great, thank you, Stefanie. So lots of really interesting points there to hopefully pick up later, but at this point I would like to turn now to the member state level. So within this kind of overall framework that Stefanie's laid out, of course there are many things that member states can do, and in many cases are doing, to help steer their own planning and policies onto a climate neutral course. And we may have time later to discuss some of the things that member states have done kind of at their own initiative, like adopting national climate laws and participation processes like citizen assemblies and so on, which can all contribute to creating certainly a political momentum around climate neutrality and potentially a good understanding of how to reach it. But clearly essential, and the first and kind of foremost focus for today is that understanding of the pathways and the steps needed to reach climate neutrality. And in principle, the national long-term strategies are a key instrument to help countries plot out this course. And now it's time to hear a little bit about how that process is being experienced at national level. We're lucky to have here today representatives of 3 member states who can share their experiences of developing and using and potentially updating these strategies. The countries in question, they're all from a sort of particular part of the map. In another life, we were sort of saying with Ecologic earlier, it would have been nice to meet in a Viennese coffee house perhaps, or a Czech beer cellar, or a German ice cream cafe or something to discuss this, but obviously we're doing it by Zoom. So if we go in the order of when the countries submitted their long-term strategies, just to sort of take one rule, I would like to turn to Germany, who were the first ones from this group, and I'll turn to Andrea Meyer. Andrea is currently the head of unit of the Climate Action Plan, Climate Action Programmes and Cabinet Committee on Climate Action in the German Federal Ministry for the Environment. So I think listening to all those names, I think we really have the right person here for this discussion. So Andrea, you adopted as Germany the National Long-Term Strategy in 2016, and that document is what you submitted for the deadline on the 1st of January 2020. That's a few years ago, and as we've just been hearing from Stefanie, things kind of evolved since then, not least the adoption of your own climate law and change of goals and so on. So is there a process in your case to revise the long-term strategy, and how does that connect to what's happening at the EU level?
Thanks for the question, and thanks for having me today. Well, of course, there is a process which doesn't follow straight lines, I would say, but basically the lines that are politically viable. The long-term strategy started off with a national goal of what we called extensive greenhouse gas neutrality, which basically meant that those who were still favoring 80 to 95% mitigation were still on boat or in the boat, and we were still able to say that we were heading for full greenhouse gas neutrality. That changed with our National Climate Act that was passed in 2019, and which is now sort of the status quo. So that basically means we need to revise our long-term strategy, which we were originally planning for 2019, but which obviously didn't happen because otherwise we wouldn't be talking about the 2016 document. We are currently, with our national elections coming up, which you all will all know in September this year, we are currently sort of pre-preparing, if you will. So there's no official preparation process, but of course my unit and colleagues are looking into options of how to revise the strategy. We do have a sectoral approach, which we will keep, obviously, but we are thinking about adding a what we call mainstreaming greenhouse gas neutrality section, and are discussing that because we believe that if we all in Germany, but also in the EU, are heading for greenhouse gas neutrality in 2050, that not only means that we have to adjust environmental politics and sectoral politics, that is like economic policies or transportation, but we also need to look into policies such as social politics and so on, because otherwise we won't get there. And the problem is that, of course, there are think tanks who have been talking about that, but as far as I know, most people are thinking about how can we make about a question like how can we make climate politics more socially viable, but not so much, well, how do we have to change social politics if we are heading for greenhouse gas neutrality? So that will be quite an interesting debate, I suppose. Pre-preparing means that, of course, we have to wait for the outcome of the general elections in September 2021. To see what a possible new government wants to head for. But in general, we have a governance structure in Germany that means that the National Climate Act sort of sets the framework with the goals. The climate plan is what we call our long-term strategy, shows how to get there, basically, how the path could be chosen or could be designed. and the climate action programs and ad hoc programs that we're now currently talking about sort of do the work, contain the instruments that get us there, hopefully.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Well, certainly sounds like you're on the case with trying to solve all of this, you know, as much as you can be before the election. Just to pick up on that point about the mainstreaming greenhouse gas neutrality, that's really interesting, because I think, of course, what everybody involved in these strategies sees is that there's no way that one department in a government can achieve, you know, this by themselves. It will need the buy-in and the sort of agreement to orient decisions around this goal by everybody across government and beyond. Could you just say a little bit more about early thoughts, I suppose, on how you think that could be operationalized, this mainstreaming piece? And by that, I mean partly within the government. I know you have your climate cabinet system already, so you could maybe say a few words about that. But also this idea of really even getting the social politics more activated around this. Not easy to do, but it would be good to hear your sort of starting points. Thank you.
Sure, I'll try to. This is basically on behalf of Andrea Meyer, not so much on behalf of my ministry or Germany to start with.
Well understood. A good place for things to start, I think.
Yeah. Well, the Climate Cabinet, which you may have heard about, is technically a committee of the cabinet that takes the government's decision. So it's a committee that is headed by the Chancellor, co-headed by the treasurer, and the acting head is basically my minister, which means we are doing the work and the others get to decide, basically. And all the sectoral ministers are also members of the climate cabinet, which means the minister for energy, the minister for transportation, etc., etc. And the minister for science is also a sort of adjunct member, if you will. But for example, the Minister for Health is not a member of this committee, or the Minister for Social Questions is not a member of this committee. So far as I can tell, discussions about climate action being socially viable usually focus on the question, how far can you raise a CO2 pricing without people getting out on the street and wearing yellow vests? That is a bit abbreviated, but basically I think it contains the main discussion point we currently have. The question we ask, and we try to ask from other people, is why are these people going out on the street? And what exactly is the problem with the CO2 pricing? And what is the problem with the whole question of where do prices lead? Whom do they benefit? Whom do they not benefit, etc.? And of course, in the end, and that is a total personal opinion here, you will talk about distribution of wealth and the question of how is wealth evaluated? Like, what is why can you still earn money with burning fossil fuels, basically? And how long will you be able to earn money on burning fossil fuels? And when I look into the debates I see within the industries and especially within the finance markets, many people are turning their ways towards more greenhouse gas neutrality because they understand that this is the direction to go if you still want to earn money. So this is not a thought by just some person who thinks that the world has to be changed overall or something. But the question is, what are the tasks for governments in designing this process in order to get probably not everybody on board, but to give everybody a chance to get on board. And that is the discussions we're currently having. Of course, this is very vague, but that's the point we're at, basically. I hope that helps.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. Thank you, Andrea. And I think what we can see from this is that as we get further into the question and try to get to this goal of putting everything on the path to climate neutrality, it's taking us into really some quite fundamental systemic and structural questions in the German case. you've described earlier that you have this governance system that with the act that sets the goals and the strategy that sets the path and the climate action programs to do the work. Just in case it's interesting for people from other countries, could you maybe just say a little bit about almost what you would consider the sort of the real drivers in that governance system that have helped to get you to the point of asking these sort of fundamental questions? So I know, for example, that the long-term strategy actually sort of precipitated, in effect, the sectoral targets that are now part of the climate law and so on. So you've kind of had you've used quite creatively the different tools at your disposal, I think, to arrive at this comprehensive system. And maybe it's interesting for people to just hear a bit about that sort of sequencing.
Yeah, happy to. Well, basically, I would still say the sectoral goals that we have and that we first started with in the Climate Action Plan are one of the central drivers. And obviously, this was very, very much debated within the cabinet and within the civil society and among industries. So we had a very wide participation process, both with lobbyists, basically, so organizations, and with citizens. That took a lot of resources, personally and money-wise, but it helped a lot to get people to talk with each other about what possible solutions there are, and not so much about why I personally can't do this or can't do that. So dialogue is the second driver that I would mention. Even though when you actually when you organize that dialogue, and we currently do that through what we call the Aktionsbündnis, which is sort of a climate action alliance, in which we have about 200 organizations as members, and they meet twice a year in plenary with our minister and our state secretary actually doing the moderation and the discussion. So there's some sort of gain if you actually are a member of this alliance. And this is, from a climate action person point of view, a very, very slow process, to say the least. You know, we started this in 2015, and I was at some point I was in charge of this as a desk officer, and I was like, okay, so let's take 2 years until we get to agreeing on common targets. Well, it's been 7 years now, or 6 years, and we're not there yet, you know. But I still wouldn't want to miss this alliance, even though it's tons of work to actually organize it and to have everybody on board, because you really have to see which resources from which people or which organizations you can use, because it is not a process you can do on your own as a government. On the other hand, you need to set the rules. So the Climate Action Act actually is setting the rules, and we have to adhere to that. You know, we really have to. Right now, for example, the rule in the Climate Action Act is there is an annual emissions value that you cannot overstep in each sector. And one sector obviously overstepped it just a little. And of course, everybody's debating, like, you know, oh, it's only this little, you know? Do we really have to do an action program? Like, sure, here's the law. You have to. I'm sorry, you know? And that is quite the debate still. But we have an instrument that gives us a framework to which we keep, you know. And of course, there is a way of changing the law again, but it is a law. It was passed by the parliament, you know.
Sure. So
we really have to stick to that.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Well, I know that this sectoral approach that you've got in the German law is attracting quite a lot of interest in other places, as well as they consider what could be the right form of law for themselves. Great, well, thank you, Andrea. That's extremely illuminating. And I would now like to kind of move slightly across to the Czech Republic. And there we are honoured to have with us Pavel Zamyslicky. I knew I shouldn't try. Pavel is an engineer by training. And since 2007, he's been the Director of the Energy and Climate Protection Department at the Ministry of the Environment. And Pavel, the Czech Republic was an early adopter too with your long-term strategy. In 2017, you adopted your general principles. And what, if any, impact would you say this has had on national policy making so far?
Yeah, first of all, good morning, everybody, and thanks for inviting me and the questions. Of course, the climate protection policy of the Czech Republic is an important document. This was the first document of say, guiding us in terms of GHG emissions and long-term pathway towards 2050. So it was important document to setting the scene and pathway for further steps in terms of climate mitigation policies and measures. Of course, it helped a lot to open debate with other important ministries, which are the major policymakers in terms of energy or agriculture or industry and transport. So I would say that the policy itself helped us a lot to cooperate, to talk each other, and to plan more in a, let's say, cross-sectoral way. But it's let's say never-ending process. So there are still some issues for improvement in terms of, for instance, to use common databases, common modeling tools for preparation of different long-term scenarios. And in terms of the whole process, obviously we need to continue with evaluation for this year according to the policy tasks. We are obliged to prepare the policy evaluation for the government. We have elections as well, like in Germany, but in the case of the Czech Republic, we have elections in October, so we would like to manage to evaluate the policy and submit the results of evaluation still to this current government. And then we have a plan to prepare update of the climate policy in 2023. Obviously, it's a lot to do and a lot of work ahead of us because we need to think how to incorporate new EU ambitions and targets. So we will work on scenarios towards climate neutrality by 2050, because the current policy from 2017 is aiming at minus 80% emission reduction by 2050. So we need to look at the scenarios which will move us further, and as well there's going to be a completely new set of policies and instruments which will address, let's say, higher ambition of 55% reduction, at least 55% reduction target by 2030. So it would mean, let's say, higher ambitious target for the Czech Republic as well. So we have a lot to do in terms to prepare and propose goals which will be in line to our contribution to the EU targets, and as well to prepare a set of instruments which will help us to achieve them in a middle term and longer term as well. So it's still, let's say, ongoing process. It's sometimes difficult to catch up because it's it means that there's a lot of different changes. One important thing is that we need to start, let's say, relatively sooner before we will prepare a submission for the governmental decision. So it's sometimes difficult to have all the changes on the EU level incorporated in a policy draft. So it's a difficult task, but we try to cooperate as well in interministerial working group, which is trying to include the work of all sectoral experts, all sectoral ministries. We need to, let's say, enhance, say, dialogue with public sector, with NGOs. They are part of the working group, but now we see that there is a big interest of public sector and NGOs to be involved. So we will have to think about how to provide the room for debate, as Andrea mentioned, example of Germany. this case. So we are working on that as well.
Great, thank you very much, Pavel. So that's very interesting to hear that effectively the EU target is precipitating some changes in the Czech approach and the Czech policy. Just on that question of sort of updating your scenarios and so on. First of all, do you have any particular idea of the timing that you will use for that? And also in the approach that you will take to developing the scenarios and putting them into a strategy. Do you think that you will do anything differently from the last time around? I mean, you've already mentioned trying to enhance the public participation, but it would be good just to understand what you kind of learned from the first experience that you would be now applying this time around. Thanks.
Yeah, we would like to use, of course, the results of evaluation, because I hope that this year from the evaluation we will get the results, where are the, say, where is the room for improvement, including, for instance, public participation. And then we have time until 2023 to prepare an update. We would like to look at the different scenarios towards climate neutrality. The positive thing is that from the last year, we have a relatively new study on pathways to decarbonize the Czech Republic from McKinsey and Company. It was it is a very interesting study, which is focused on different sectors, different possibilities, how to reach the climate neutrality on the level of the Czech Republic, let's say representing the costs which are associated as well with such a, say, huge transition. So we roughly know how to go there, but let's say we need to analyze more deeply different possibilities and different instruments which we would need. And of course, it's going to be up to new government to adopt such more ambitious targets and policy instruments on the political level. Let's say taking into account, of course, that we will have completely new Fit for 55 policy structure on the EU level. So it's quite complex issue that you need to combine EU instruments, national instruments, and to look at different scenario. What we plan to improve is the whole, let's say, modeling framework, because so far there were different models using for GHG, national GHG projections preparation, and for instance, energy scenarios for energy policy. So we have a running R&D project which should, let's say, put us on the same basis in energy sector, in transport, in environment field, in order to have the same inputs and outputs which would be used by different, say, policymakers. So I think there is as well important room for improvement to have the same database of policies and measures and effects of those future policies and measures. So it's a technical work, but I would say important for our longer term planning.
Great. Thanks, Pavel. Yeah, I think indeed it's a big work to bring together the technical aspects and also the participation aspects and all these things to get the right policies and strategy and then translate it. And as you say, quite a delicate dance between the evolutions in the EU framework and the national developments and so on. And I see actually a question coming up, which we'll come to the panel question, the audience questions in a minute, but there's a question about whether the NECP should be updated sort of sooner than 2024 in light of all of the differences that there have been, which we'll hopefully address later. But thanks a lot, Pavel. I would now like to quickly turn to Austria. Oh, and by the way, please don't be shy to write questions in the Q&A section so that we've got some things to pick from when we come to have the later part of the discussion. So now turning to Gertraud Wollansky, who is Senior Advisor on Climate Issues in the Austrian Ministry for Climate Action. And Gertraud has been working on different aspects of climate policy for more than 25 years, I think, nationally and internationally. So we really have a great wealth of experience here. So Traude, new government has raised the target to climate neutrality by 2040. Do you need, therefore, to revise your NECP and your long-term strategy already? And a bit similar to the question I put to Pavel, what lessons from the first time around will you apply if you do that? Thanks.
Thank you, Erika, and good morning to all. I'm happy to be here. Well, yes, we delivered our NECP and the long-term strategy by the end of 2019, as foreseen in the governance regulation. And of course, the LTS then had a target year of 2050 for reaching carbon neutrality. And by the way, Matthias, we did send the English version to the UNFCCC. That's missing in your table.
Noted.
And in the government program of our current government, the climate neutrality target year was fixed with 2040, which does make quite a difference. So that's also why we sent our LTS for 2050 to the UNFCCC with a cover letter saying that the policy has changed and that we will need to update the LTS to take account of that. For the question on the NECP, I think my answer is much the same or quite like Pavel's. We do need to update the NECP, but it's not really feasible to do that before we know what comes out of all the current EU legislation processes. So we need to know what is our 2030 target within the effort sharing, what is covered or what comes out of the Fit for 55 package. And then, of course, all this has to go into our NECP, and hopefully by the time that we do update the NECP, we will also have an update of the long-term strategy already to guide the short term in line with the longer term vision. On the LTS, of course, it's not that easy to just change the target year and leave the rest as it is. We will definitely need new interim steps, new pathways. But at the same time, I think both the LTS and the NECP, as they currently are, they are very important planning documents, also for developing and implementing policies before the update can happen. And as we all know, updates of planning documents are a quite lengthy and comprehensive process that you don't do that in a couple of months. So much as we would all wish that it could happen that way, but we will have to consult with all the stakeholders again and have all the public processes to do these updates. One important development that I'd like to mention is that we had a climate referendum that reached a very high level of support from the public, and it's being discussed in Parliament, I think even now as we speak, and it contains a lot of innovative ideas and a a lot of proposals on future governance of our climate policies. So we will see how that works out, and probably get a lot of guidance from these parliamentary discussions.
Thanks, Traude. Yes, I've seen that there's some quite innovative ideas coming up in the Austrian context, and I think one of them is this idea of a climate assembly, which is to be agreed on, I think. But is it your understanding that that sort of process would actually then sort of directly inform the update of the planning documents?
I think it's difficult to say at this stage, because we don't know how the setup will work out. The proposals include the climate assembly, as you say. In German it says Klimarat, of 100 members of the population. The proposal also mentions a climate cabinet as a whole of government approach, and not only federal but also regional governments, and several other bodies that all have to work together. So I think it would be a very big step. But it would also need a lot of thinking and figuring out how these things work together to shape the policy.
Great, thank you. Well, if I may shamelessly do a quick sort of trailer from the European Climate Foundation, we're just in the process of setting up a sort of best practice network on climate assemblies to try and sort of gather the experience and insights from different versions of these sorts of processes in different places, and make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel every time, and so on. So hopefully it might be of some use when it comes to thinking through how that will work. So just in the last couple of minutes, thank you very much, Traude, for those insights. Just before we turn to the sort of audience discussion, I think that we can see from this that the climate neutrality goal is really catalysing some really important changes in the way governments are sort of approaching their climate policy. And as we see much more than climate policy now, really looking all across government, as Traude was just saying, to shift everything onto the climate neutrality course. But just to very quickly turn back to Stefanie for a last question, if I may. Stefanie, we've heard here from 3 countries that have submitted and will be updating their long-term strategies and are obviously making great use of them. But not all member states have yet so far submitted their documents, and that's more than a year on from the deadline now. Why do you think that is, and what additional support do you think it could be useful for the Commission to provide in terms of perhaps technical support via DG Reform or others, or perhaps a more elaborated template that is breaking the task down more, or more guidance, or how do you think help could be offered perhaps to those countries that are not yet benefiting from having these strategies as the ones we've heard from today are? Thanks.
Yes, thanks, Erica. Well, you allow me not to speculate on the reasons, why member states may not have yet submitted their national energy and climate plans. Of course, from the Commission, we not only push the member states, but we work with the member states to see what is actually hindering the process and how we can indeed, as you say, offer help to get there, because those national energy and climate plans are really important. We published last year in September our analysis of the plans submitted, which showed, on the one hand that we are on track, as I said, to surpass our 2030 target, but we all know also more needs to be done, in particular in the area of energy efficiency. So that I think came out quite clearly. But we also know that, these plans are really important input for the recovery and resilience plans that member states are currently also preparing. So So in that sense, they are important, even though in the light of what will happen on the 2030 target and the whole discussion, an update will be needed. But yeah, we
Stefanie, if I may, that's all very, very true, I think, in relation to the NECPs. On the long-term strategies, obviously that's sort of been a bit quieter in terms of Commission attention and also member states sort of meeting of deadline. Could you just say a little bit about those specifically in terms of how additional support that could be offered, or how you might sort of push member states a bit more to make sure that they actually do those documents, given how helpful we do see that they are from the countries that have presented today?
Yeah, again, it's very difficult now, to talk about the reasons that hinder the member states individually to come forward. We do discuss these issues. It's you need to look at what is the problem to be able to solve it, but that's where the Commission services work closely with the national governments to see what can be done. And of course, we emphasize, the need to come forward with those strategies we do have some really, really good examples as well. I think the discussion we're having today, and other member states also testifying that it's actually useful to have those strategies is good and helpful. So that also not always the Commission is pushing, because that I think is also quite important. That other than that, you can only offer help and try to address the issues that are still outstanding there.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, thank you, Stefanie, and thank you so much to the panel for your excellent insights, which I think have given us a really kind of rich base for the next part of the session, which is the questions from the audience. But just before we do that, and just to kind of make everybody come alive again, we're going to go back to Mentimeter, and actually the question here relates to what we were just, what Stefanie was just talking about, which is your thoughts from the audience about what actually could significantly improve long-term strategies and their integration into policy. And it's a bit too sort of small to see here, but you'll see on your phones. Here are a variety of possible things that might conceivably help with the long-term strategies, not least in the countries that haven't submitted them yet. So please go ahead and just vote which of these you think would help. This one will take a few minutes because there's lots of sentences for you to read.
And the organizers have unfortunately not set it to multiple choice, in fact, so you will have to choose one, which wasn't the idea. My apologies.
Oh, wow, that makes it hard.
Yeah, I know. Let's not fiddle with it now.
I think that's probably right. Okay, so public participation coming out quite far ahead at the moment, but let's give it a bit more time.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, I'm just going to...
single choice focuses the mind.
That's true. And as you see, there's a mixture of things here that might be more coming from the national level or more coming from the EU level. So that, I think, is in the spirit of this being very much a joint endeavour between the between the Commission and the member states. Okay,
That's
we
a
seem
wrap.
to be Yeah, I think so. So interesting to see the very strong voting there for the more comprehensive public participation processes. And that suggests it will be interesting to look at some of the more innovative examples that different countries have been doing. And of course, with those processes, there's the running of the processes and then how well the recommendations are followed up that are important dimensions. We have also some votes for everything, in fact. So the creation of dedicated national modelling capacity, independent expert advisory bodies at national level, and stronger EU pressure on member states, all receiving quite some votes. And then a few people think that a more detailed template and guidance would be helpful. And potentially even a common indicator set to develop and assess national long-term strategies, and also targeted additional EU-level policies and measures. So plenty there to potentially respond to via the Fit for 55 package and the processes that member states themselves will be defining. So, well, thanks a lot for taking part in that. And we now will go to the kind of most semi-interactive part of the discussion. Unfortunately, we can't actually have you read out your questions yourself. So I'm actually going to ask Matthias, who has been monitoring, I think, the questions coming in, to let us know what seems to be emerging as a particularly interesting question that people would like to have answered.
Okay, yes, this I can do. Feeling slightly awkward in that I have slipped in my own, but they have been voted up to the top of the list. So actually, let's connect directly to what we just saw. To all the panelists, that specific question, how can the role of national long-term strategies be strengthened? If you had to choose one change, what would that be and why? That is one. I think that would take everybody to respond. It could also be a closing one. Otherwise, I think the NECP question is answered, and there is actually a specific question also on on outreach to the public, so we could address that as a topic as well.
Great, thanks, Matthias. Well, I think let's begin with your question. It's probably easier for me to promote that than you. This rather sort of overarching question of how can the role of national long-term strategies be strengthened? What is the one main change you would choose and why? I think indeed that probably is good to get everybody's view on that. So Pavel, is it okay if I turn to you first for that one?
Yeah, of course. The strengthening of strategies. I think we will have to look at this. I think the one issue is that I think that a lot of member states discussed something like a climate law, and now in order to have a stronger interaction, maybe sector to sector sub-targets and things like that, which would be more obligatory than the traditional, let's say, policy or strategy. Now it will be important to see, let's say, appetite for such a, let's say, national legislations once we have a, let's say, almost adopted European climate law, whether it would somehow, let's say, increase the appetite of member states to introduce their own let's say, legal frameworks in order to have a, let's say, more strengthened, let's say, policy enforcement, for instance, or more legally robust targets and sub-targets. I think it will be interesting to see, let's say, the interaction between the EU level and member states level in this regard.
Great, thank you, Pavel. Interesting point there that the EU climate law, I think, is actually a framework really for the overall EU, and there could still be a role for actual legal frameworks at national level specifically, as you say. But very interesting comments. Thanks a lot. I'd now go to maybe Traude.
Thank you, Erika, and I agree with Pavel on the important role of legislation in this regard. speaking as a lawyer, of course. And I think that if we could have a legal reference to the LTS, that is, then it would really become a guidance for mainstreaming climate neutrality into policies. And at the same time, what I think is really needed is this whole of government approach, that it's not seen as the prerogative or the burden of a handful of ministers to take care of it and to implement the strategy, but that it's really something that all the administration has to adhere to on all different levels. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Traude. Very complimentary answer there, I think. Now to Andrea.
Thanks. Well, mostly I agree with what has just been said. I just wanted to add one thought. If you study the coming up of the new US administration, you can see they have a whole of government approach, not only with John Kerry, who's traveling all around the world, but especially with Gina McCarthy, who basically does what we're talking about here, taking everybody into having everybody being responsible for their field of action to adhere with climate action. This is something, and we talked about that for Germany, that we'd love to see, but which is pretty difficult because our setup is totally different from the one in the US, obviously. And the other thought I wanted to add, basically as a food for thought, is that we do have a whole of government approach for economic policies. And the question is, how do we get our issue there, right there, at least parallel to the one that is existing? And that is the fight we're fighting. So it's nothing new. It's basically the question of how do we take the place that we believe we need to actually fulfill our goals or reach our goals. Thank you.
Yeah, very, very good food for thought. Thank you very much, Andrea. Stefanie, perhaps you might want to comment on that, but also your answer to the original question, please.
Yes, I find it also a bit difficult to just pinpoint to one, because it's a strategy, it's a really complex document, and to just say there's one miracle trick that would actually improve it is difficult. But I do agree with what was said, that this mainstreaming, and not only of climate policy, and I would say to Andrea, we don't need to look at the US. We do have a holistic approach with the Green Deal in Europe. And that is the fundamental element of the Green Deal, is that you cannot ignore it in whatever policy you put out there. It's our basis, from at least at the European level, how we see it, that all policies need to contribute to the goals of the Green Deal, and climate is only one part of it, which is an important part, but there's much more to it if we want to really get to a sustainable future. And maybe one comment, because I do think, we shouldn't make that mistake and think everything can be regulated at EU level or everything can be regulated at national level. It's really closely interlinked. There's a big, big role for the national level, because, very simplistically put, no citizen calls Brussels to find out how to renovate his or her house. So that is, you need to see those policies in a national context. You need to have them close to the citizens if you want to bring them along. We saw the poll on public participation. This is really crucial. And I know, for example, in Austria, there are quite many initiatives how to, structure participatory processes, and really, really heartening to see these projects, but very, very important to get the necessary buy-in for the transformation that we are starting to be in, and it's really, really fundamental.
Yeah, thanks very much. And this public participation point, just to pick up on that, does seem to be coming up a lot and is clearly considered very important by everybody here. And arguably, perhaps we need a sort of whole of society approach as well as a whole of government approach. And there's one very interesting question from Karen Kleinvort in the question box, which is a bit long, but basically she's pointing out that Agora Energiewende has presented a set of practical steps towards climate neutrality in Germany. And she mentioned some of the actions that are included there, which include things like reducing livestock numbers, deploying carbon capture and storage, and she's making the point that considering part of the German population, and I don't think it's just Germany, is rather technology critical, and even we're seeing resistance to vaccination and this kind of thing now. How can you bring the population on board for implementing the National Climate Act in the case of Germany, or the equivalent in others? Do we not need a really massive outreach program to do that? So I'll put that to Andrea first, since the question was specifically asked to you, but it may be that others want to quickly comment on that too. Thanks.
Well, I guess that's a short answer. Yes, we do. I mean, yes, we do. But then is it enough? I believe it doesn't suffice, basically, because the problem is you will, even if you do this outreach, and we tried in quite different ways to do that. And I wouldn't say that I'm totally content with the ways we tried, but the problem is, whom do you reach? And sort of in German, we usually say we try to invite people to come with us. And the question is, do they really want to come with us, first of all? Or what does it need for them to come with us and give up what they believe is better than the things we offer, basically? So I think the problem is that dialogue and an offer or outreach is one major part of what we're doing, or has to be one major part of what we're doing, but it won't help to lay everything on the individual, basically. What we do need, and what we're trying to do, is we do need legislation, we do need incentives, we do need market-based approaches, and we basically, and this also looks out to the Fit for 55 package, we need everything we have. We need every single instrument we can have, because with only one instrument or two instruments, we just won't get there, basically. And the other thing we actually need is we need to have an insight into who loses what, but who gains what. So far, when we talk about long-term strategies, we try to define paths that work for many people or many institutions. We try to avoid lock-ins. But basically, I think we talk too little about which chances can derive from that and who will profit from what we're doing. And of course, the people who will profit from it actually already start profiting. But I mean, maybe that's a German point of view. We usually don't talk so much about what we're profiting from, but basically what we're losing. So that's a very German character trait, actually. So it's pretty difficult to actually sell this thing, you know, because obviously everybody's losing and nobody's gaining anything, which is just not true. And the other thing we need, since we're talking about this from the EU level within the Fit for 55 package, is the chance to actually change pricing schemes, which basically means revising the energy tax directive, which I suppose everybody wants, and nobody knows if that will actually happen. But if we don't get that, that will make us, that will give us a lot more work than if we had a revised version of that directive. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Andrea. Very, very thoughtful reflections there, and I think I imagine everybody here would agree that that very comprehensive approach of pricing and policies and sort of, well, of course, individual actions as well, but not only that are needed to achieve this. I would like to quickly turn to the question of the EU climate law, since that came up as also something people were quite interested in. But before I do, was there any other of the panelists that wanted to just comment on that last question?
Can I quickly come in?
Please, yeah.
On the whole of society approach, I really couldn't agree more. And I think that for the last few years, a large part of civil society has been pushing governments for more action and not the other way around. So I think this is a very, very hopeful and positive development. We don't have all civil society behind climate action, obviously. But I think that the initiatives that are there, they are really a fantastic development, and they can help us, and they can also show us the way how to make sure to leave no one behind, and to make this a transition that benefits not only the climate, but also other interests like social and environmental interests. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. And just to quickly try and summarize one of the questions that has just popped up, I think, is that Paula Hoffman is asking, is it necessary to change our economy system and its focus on profit and accumulation of capital towards a more sustainable, community-based and non-capitalist form in order to address the social dimension of the fight against climate change? I just read it, sorry, I didn't summarize it. But I mean, one may think what one thinks about that, but I think what is really interesting from some of these more innovative forms of engagement and participation with citizens is that some of these kind of taboo areas and no-go areas do actually get brought into the spotlight when you put, you know, a sort of a farmer together with a student, together with a you know, the head of a bank or something. Interesting ideas can emerge. Stefanie, I saw you had your hand up.
Yes, thanks, indeed, because to be honest, when the question is, do we need a platform for public participation, I have to come in and say we do have a platform because we created the European Climate Pact. And that is an important element. It is an initiative that invites people, communities, organizations, whoever wants to share knowledge about climate change, to share also experiences, to showcase projects, to learn together, to develop and implement solutions and scale them up. I think that is also needed. You know, sometimes we really see very good solutions in a smaller context, which has the potential to be scaled up to the whole of Europe, maybe. So this exchange is happening under the Climate Pact, and I think it's very important to mention.
Great, thank you, Stefanie. So just quickly turning to the climate law, and then if there's time, there's one more question on the long-term strategy specifically that I'd like to come to. On the climate law, we had a question from Pedro Barata, and I think this is related to long-term strategies, of course, which is there a role for independent climate advisory panel also at the European level? So as we've seen, there are these sorts of bodies at national level, and I think Andrea and Pavel both mentioned that they can be very helpful for sort of advancing progress and policy design at the national level. And I think what we see from these sorts of bodies is that they are very, they provide additional kind of cover and input to the governments and the ones who will have to actually implement the work, showing that this is really the independent expert advice. This is one of the things that's up for discussion in the EU climate law, and it would be interesting just to get a view from the panelists how they see that idea. Perhaps I can go to you, Gertraud.
I'm sorry, I lost the connection a little. Can you repeat your last?
So the question is just about the role of independent advisory bodies at EU level as well as at national level.
I think that independent advisory bodies can be helpful at any level, be that EU, national or regional. Yes.
Okay, it's short and sweet. Okay, if I can go to you, Andrea, thanks.
Thanks. I just wanted to add that the problem I see with these advisory bodies is the question of what are they discussing, what are the questions, and what are they promised to get back from that. And this is something very important because on the federal level in Germany, we see that, for example, our ministry was pretty ready to actually give a feedback but to cut it short, not everybody was, to say the least. So that's pretty difficult if you have an advisory body that basically steers to somewhere in the nirvana because the government won't give a feedback on what they're doing, you know. And this has to be set up correctly to actually have a surplus from what they're doing, because otherwise they're just doing something and nobody will ever listen.
Absolutely. So proper sort of integration into the process. Great, thank you. And just I'm trying, we haven't got much time left, but there was one question that is a rather factual one that people may wish to know the answer to about sorry, changed my mind. Should we have a more common set of parameters and information to inform national long-term strategies? Currently, they're based on different assumptions about the potentials and the cost of options of going to net zero and so on. Would having a more kind of standardized framework and also set of assumptions and data and so on for that help to improve the quality? Pavel, maybe.
Yeah, I think that we can work on let's say EU reference scenario, that we have some, let's say, very useful inputs from the European Commission and EEA to, let's say, have a basis for our modeling work on long-term scenarios. We can use the reference for the, let's say, future prospect and future evolution in different sectors, say, to look at future trends in population growth or in, let's say, development of, for instance, fuel mix, which is expected by EU on EU expert level. So obviously we have a freedom to decide which data we will use, but I think that the current level of what is provided as a EU reference scenario is fine, is satisfactory.
Great, thanks, Pavel. And Andrea, did I see you quickly raise your hand there?
Yeah, thanks. I think the problem, at least from my national point of view, is that obviously everybody's trying to make the best of the things they wanted to suggest anyway. So basically, they try to figure out which scenario serves them best, and that is the national debate you usually have. What we're trying to do to avoid that or make it better is to involve scientists and standards as to which reference scenario we use and how do we actually assess the impacts of what people are suggesting and stuff like that. So I think my advice would be to turn to scientists for that, who actually give you some sort of reference in whatever way. It doesn't need to be a full reference scenario, but basically a reference of best practice scientific wise.
Great. Thanks very much, Andrea. Well, I see that we are almost at time, so there's loads of other really good questions, and I'm really sorry that we didn't get to go to more of them. There was things about the role of the EU in helping countries in Africa and elsewhere to also become climate neutral or become greener. More questions about Fit for 55 and so on, but yeah, I guess we'll have to take those up in other fora. So I would like to thank our panelists very much for your extremely rich contributions. I think we've done a great tour there of the ins and outs of long-term strategy mechanics themselves, of the governance structures that kind of lie behind them and can help to implement them, of public participation processes and how all that's interacting with the EU level. So I think we've done a pretty good tour within the limited time available, and also helped, of course, by the really excellent questions from the audience. Thank you very much for that. So I would thank Ecologic and the Climate Recon partners for putting on this event, as well as all of yourselves. And Matthias, would you like to say any last words before we turn to our closing Mentimeter?
No, just a big thank you also from our side for everybody making the time this morning, both speakers and attendees. We very much appreciate your interest and invite you to follow the Climate Recon 2050 activities. There will be more in-depth analyses of some of the national strategies and also some regional comparative analysis, and we will obviously share that not just with our core group of partners, but also with the wider community. So, you know, watch the climatedialogue.eu space.
Great, thank you, Matthias. And just for a last bit of fun, we're going to just see where you're all at now at the end of this conversation, if you wouldn't mind just quickly going to Mentimeter one more time.
And we will soon find out whether in this case we set it to multiple or a single choice.
Best laid plans.
Multiple it is.
So you might be thinking all of the above. Not that they're all entirely consistent, are they?
This gives me a little bit the feeling as if we were, you know, in a workshop situation and people had little dots and sticky dots that they could go and pin up on the whiteboard.
Exactly so, exactly so. It's the best we could do in this situation, but I'm kind of encouraged to see where the majority of these things are going. Only one doomsayer there, quite a lot of hungry people, myself included, but mostly I would say, quite a lot of curiosity to see an update to the EU strategy. There you go, Stefanie. But overall, I think a positive dynamic, a gratitude for the contributions, and a desire that we can continue the conversation. So we'll just have to make sure we create another opportunity for that sometime soon. So please go and get your coffee or whatever you'd like to have, and thank you once again.